roll call for attendance. Woody Chidick,
Aye, here.
Lee Darst,
Aye.
Michael Dickey,
Here.
Charlie Higginson,
Here.
David McMorris,
Here.
Matt Watkins here. We have all members present. We just have one piece of regular business tonight, which is on the agenda as use variance and dimension variance for 149 Border Street. We did get a request for withdrawal for the dimension variance that was submitted, but we still have the use variance in front of us.
Matt, sorry, let me interrupt. Did you say 149 Bordeaux Street or King Street?
Oh, did I say border? I meant to say 149 King Street. Yep. Thank you. And so we have the variance for the use in front of us. I see Attorney Brodsky here. We did receive the request for withdrawal of the dimension variance prior to our deadline, and we had a few pieces of material that came past our deadline as well. So Attorney Brodsky, if you want to.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Brodsky, and I represent the applicant PSI Atlantic Acquisition 8 LLC. And I apologize, I'm at a different computer this evening at the last minute. I had some security issue with my laptop, so I switched to my wife's computer. My cat, who usually sits here, is not happy, so if she makes an appearance, I apologize for that. And here this evening with Jesse Morgan, our Senior Vice President at PSI, as well as Dan Ketches, Registered Professional Engineer with VHB. We last met on January 7th, and at that time it was suggested that PSI reconsider its application for the dimensional variance for building height. And we were also asked to provide additional legal analysis of the elements of the grant of a variance, as well as provide a copy of the Deckelbaum versus Zoning Board of Appeals of Provincetown decision. As you noted, Mr. Watkins, we did submit our request to withdraw that application for the building height variance. And excuse me while I shoo the cat away, very professional, but we provide you with a copy of the Deckelbaum decision, additional legal analysis, as well as a memorandum from VHB dated January 27, 25. And I take responsibility for getting those two. I think it turned out to be a day late. I thought the deadline was the close of business on Tuesday. I had been working with staff to locate some additional information, and so we were waiting to the very last minute to try and get that information to be able to provide to you. Ultimately, there was no additional information, but it was our intention to get that to you as soon as we can. And again, I was under the impression that we had to the close of business. In summary, and I'm going to get into this in more detail, I believe we've made a compelling case for the grant of a variance and have presented strong and credible evidence satisfying each of the prongs of the variance test. And so I'll try to be as brief as possible, but we did provide detailed information. First, I'd like to address unique circumstances relating to soil, shape, or topography. As Dan Ketches will explain, and I think you're aware, this property contains unique soil and groundwater conditions, as well as topography that create hardship here. Dan will explain that we've conducted extensive subsurface investigations, which demonstrate that the property contains fill and clay containing soils, which have low hydraulic conductivity. These conditions limit the portions of the property suitable for stormwater infiltration, as well as for on-site septic. As you're also aware, there's a significant grade change, which limits the development potential for structures and parking on much of the property. The proposed self-storage business, however, can be built into the existing slope with the first and second levels below finished grade. This is non-habitable space, So we are not required to have windows, unlike other commercial uses, which will need windows and doors for light and egress. Presently, there are no stormwater controls on the property, and stormwater runs off onto Route 3A. The proposed self-storage building requires only a small surface infiltration basin, which we have the ability to locate at the front of the property. The construction of this project will dramatically improve stormwater management and abate the runoff that presently runs onto Route 3A. Self-storage also has a low parking demand, which reduces the need for impervious surfaces, as well as the size of the stormwater infrastructure. Other uses with higher parking ratios will require more impervious areas and create additional stormwater runoff, which cannot be accommodated on this site because of the soil and groundwater conditions. These same conditions restrict the management of septic. Self-storage building generates the same amount of flow as a 3-bedroom single-family dwelling. There's only one area on the property that can accommodate this small septic system, and a larger septic system is infeasible given site constraints. The self-storage use also generates less traffic on a square footage basis than other commercial uses. A similarly sized office building would generate 7 to 10 times as much traffic and also have a higher parking demand. And so the self-storage use, as we demonstrated to the planning board and provided information to, will not impact traffic on Route 3A. VHB opines, and you'll hear this from Dan, that the property is encumbered by unique soil groundwater conditions that limit the feasibility of commercial development on the property. And this is actually evidenced by the historic underutilization of this property. There has been no principal use on the property since approximately 2001, and the property has fallen into disrepair. As you know, there is a communication tower on the property that was allowed by special permit, but this is a permissible accessory use. The tower is not a principal use under section 304.3B8 of the zoning bylaws. In 1997, when that special permit was granted, the principal use was apparently auto repair. I should say in 1997, the principal use was auto repair under a special permit granted to a Mr. Eves. Prior to that, there was some kind of boat livery and repair service on the property. Interestingly, the special permit for the communication tower was conditioned on Mr. Eves removing unregistered cars from the property, suggesting that there were zoning and other non-compliance issues associated with auto repair on this property. We understand that the auto repair use stopped in 2001, and the building, which was located on this property, demolished in 2013. As I indicated, since 2001, there's been no viable principal use on the property on account of these unique soil, groundwater conditions, as well as topography. So I'll try to be brief on the second prong of our variance test, which is literal enforcement of the zoning bylaws would involve hardship to PSI. Hardship is not being able to reasonably use the property for the purposes of or in the manner allowed by the zoning bylaw. Hardship can also be found where, due to unique circumstances, it is not economically feasible or likely that the locus would be developed in the future for use permitted by zoning. And I provided you with citations to several cases. The first is CREASA, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, CREASIA versus Milford Zoning Board of Appeals, which is admittedly a trial court decision and has limited legal precedence, but it's very helpful on this point. In that case, the trial court upheld a variance to allow a landowner to divide property into 2 lots, one for an existing residential dwelling and other for proposed construction of another residential dwelling. The trial court found that there was no viable economic past use for the vacant land, except for the proposed use as a house lot and as a result found hardship. I also cited to Stonebridge Marina LLC versus Wareham Board of Appeals, another trial court decision. The trial court upheld a variance for allowable FAR, floor area ratio, to reconstruct a former dwelling on a lot associated with a historic hotel. When the landowner purchased the property, after, and this is the interesting part, after consulting with the town and being encouraged to develop the property, a different set of bylaws applied with a different FAR. The landowner subsequently purchased the property, not knowing that the bylaw had changed. The trial court affirmed the grant of a variance, finding that it would be hardship to enforce the new bylaw, which had a more stringent FAR, because that would eliminate the landowner's ability to reconstruct the house and prohibit him from making reasonable use of the property. I also cited to Deckelbaum for a different proposition. This was in my prior letter to the board, and that is that determining the extent of hardship inherently involves weighing of equities. The appeals court in Deckelbaum upheld a variance to reconstruct a deck that in fact had been destroyed by the plaintiff appealing the grant of the variance. So there was a deck that crossed over two properties. One of the property owners' contractor, without authorization of the other property owner, destroyed the whole deck. The victim landowner reconstructed the deck, but it encroached within the common property line and side yard setback. Was told that he needed a variance. Applied for a variance, and the property owner whose contractor destroyed the deck opposed the grant of a variance. So under those facts, the appeals court found that the conduct of the plaintiff, the offending landowner, was an appropriate factor to consider in order to prevent substantial hardship to the landowner. And the court stated, and I quote, the question of hardship and the extent of, I apologize for the cat, let me start over again. The question of hardship and the extent of an identifiable hardship inherently involves a weight of equitable considerations, unquote. These cases support the finding that PSI has proven substantial hardship here. The unique site conditions prevent the redevelopment of the property except for self-storage use, and the property cannot be reasonably used for other uses. The equities also strongly weigh in favor of granting relief here. And I want to make clear, my citation to Deckelbaum is not to suggest that anyone, particularly anyone on behalf of the town, engaged in any bad conduct. To the contrary, everyone associated with the extensive review and approval of this project, as well as the consolidation of the commercial districts at town meeting, have acted in good faith. It's always been my belief that everyone intended to allow PSI to proceed to construct its self-storage building, notwithstanding the zoning change. It was Mr. Dickey who told the board at our last meeting that the zoning bylaw committee did not address the elimination of self-storage use. And I think his words were something to the effect that PSI has been left in the lurch. In my prior letter to the board, I also quoted Mr. Callahan, the former chair of the planning board and gentleman instrumental in the zoning changes, who told town meeting that the consolidation of the commercial districts was being done for simplicity, when nothing having been developed of any specialty in the light industry and technology business district, except that, and I'm quoting, technology business district has yielded us one storage facility that's already built and a new one that just got permitted a week ago. Mr. Callahan was referring to our project at town meeting, which had been permitted. As you know, we assert that PSI did not have fair notice that the consolidation of the commercial districts would result in the elimination of self-storage use. And candidly, the facts strongly suggest that the town did not understand that the practical effect of consolidation would be to prohibit construction of PSI's project, which had been approved by the planning board. And as you know, no one told us during that permitted period that we had this problem. So I respectfully suggest that the equities strongly favor granting a variance here. Lastly, relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without nullifying the intent and purpose of the bylaw. One purpose of the bylaw is to conserve the value of land and to prevent blight. The grant of a variance is entirely consistent with this purpose. In contrast, if the board denies relief, this is going to likely result in continued underutilization of the property, reduction in value, as well as continued blight on the property. Also, stormwater will continue to run off the property unabated. The purpose of the technology business, as described by Mr. Callahan at town meeting, was to develop specialty uses, including self-storage. Town meeting suggests intended to promote self-storage use in the former technology business district. And in fact, the site plan approval that we received for PSI's project was entirely consistent with that purpose. Granting relief here would effectively preserve the status quo as described by Mr. Callahan at the town meeting. The town would have 2 self-storage buildings in the former technology business. And so we're actually preserving what we believe was intended. So I'm sorry I've droned on a bit, but I'm going to ask at this point Dan to more specifically speak to his memo, at the end of which I know that Jesse Morgan would like to make a few remarks. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, good evening, members of the board. My name is Dan Ketches. I'm a civil engineer with VHB, and I'm just going to provide a brief summary of some of the key points in the supplemental memo that was submitted, specifically relating to the unique soil conditions on the site and how they relate to the use variance that has been submitted. So if I can share my screen. What you are looking at here is our site plan, grading and drainage plan. Each of the yellow circles represents a geotechnical boring, and each of the yellow squares represents a test pit that was performed. So as you can see, quite extensive geotechnical investigation, well beyond what I would typically see for a site of this size. And this investigation allowed us to have a very clear picture of the soils on site here. Generally, those soils consist of an upper layer of fill, including organics and debris, and then a second layer consisting of silty clay sand, that's a native layer, with 50 to 60% silt and clay content. So what that means is very fine-grained material, which results in low hydraulic conductivity and perched groundwater. Throughout the vast majority of the site, below that second layer, what they encountered was clay, which is even more fine-grained, even lower permeability. Along a limited portion of the site, which is circled here in the kind of bottom right, we did encounter a sand and gravel layer. So what that means is larger grain materials, much higher permeability, and lower groundwater elevations. But as you can see, limited to quite a small portion of the site relative to the overall parcel. There are 2 particularly key pieces of infrastructure that relate to soils, which would be required to make any commercial development compliant and feasible on this site. The first one is septic. There's no municipal sewer available. So an on-site disposal system needs to be provided in the form of a septic leaching field. The second piece is stormwater infiltration. Per the town standards, no increase in peak grades or runoff volumes from the site is allowed. And so stormwater infiltration is directly required for any increase in impervious coverage, such as adding pavement or roof area from the existing condition. From a design standpoint, both septic and stormwater have pretty similar requirements for the soil conditions which are suitable. In general, that means the fine-grained materials, those silts and clays, are not feasible to infiltrate or recharge into, and the systems also require adequate separation vertically to observe groundwater. In addition, the septic system has prescribed setbacks from Mass DEP, from buildings, property lines, stormwater infrastructure, and other features, which further limits, in particular in this corner, the locations that are legally allowed for a septic system. So when we consider the unique soil conditions in combination with those two required components, what it means is really that the site has limited physical capacity for stormwater infiltration, as well as septic leaching field due to the soils that have been encountered. And so what this resulted in was our proposed design here, which you can see we're able to accommodate. The green area is a leaching portion of the overall infiltration basin, where we'll dig down to that sand and gravel layer. And then we have the two boxes here are the primary and reserve septic systems as sized and required in accordance with Mass DEP methodology. The septic system is unique in that the self-storage use has an extremely low sewer generation. As mentioned, the system was sized for 350 gallons per day, similar to one single family residence. For reference, similarly sized office building is on the order of 5,000 gallons per day. A moderately sized restaurant would be on the order of thousands of gallons per day as well. And what those much larger numbers would mean is that a lot more of the site would need to be dedicated to a leaching field and start to expand into portions of the site where the soil simply cannot support it from a technical standpoint. Therefore, other commercial uses would be much more limited in the size of their development program based on the physical capacity of the soils on site. On a similar note, self-storage has very low parking demand and trip generation. So other commercial uses with higher parking demand on a square foot basis would therefore require additional parking, additional pavement, which means additional stormwater runoff and therefore additional infiltration. So in short, the uniquely low impacts associated with self-storage directly relate to the ability to provide a compliant stormwater and septic system within this limited portion of the site, which can support it from a technical standpoint based on the soils. The commercial development program associated with the project allows the project to be economically viable in order to support the significant investment in the required septic, stormwater grading, and other site improvements required to develop the site, where these other commercial uses would be much more limited in scale due to the soil limitations, the end result of which is likely the continued underutilization of the site. And by developing the site, the proposed project is providing stormwater management where none exists today, which means an improvement in water quality and a reduction in quantity of runoff from the site, all without otherwise negatively impacting the community. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions or go into details board would like. Otherwise, I will turn it over to Jesse Morgan.
Thanks, Dan. Chair, members of the board, I know that we've given quite a bit of information, so I'll be brief, but first just wanted to thank you all for the continued, consideration of our project. As Adam and Dan, have thoroughly outlined, this is an incredibly challenging property. Obviously, there's been significant development constraints that really, for the better part of a year, we put a lot of hard effort into overcoming those said constraints. And a lot of that is because the unique nature of our use has allowed us to be malleable within this site. As you all know, we've certainly worked very closely with the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, members of town staff as well throughout the approval process. And they've been supportive, collaborative, and a lot of those meetings have been productive. And we felt has led to an improved design from what we first presented, many, many months ago. So we see this as an improvement for the town of Cohasset. Obviously, some of the changes have been unfortunate to our process, but we do look forward to a positive result and hopefully being a part of the town. So with that, just thank you again for your consideration, and we're here to answer any questions and provide any information or detail that you all need to help make your decision. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that information. I guess I'll start just saying and I think we mentioned this before, but for this board, a variance is a pretty tough test. So typically, we take a look at each of these criteria kind of one at a time. And if you don't meet the first one, there's not much sense to even go to the next one, oftentimes, because you have to, meet them all. But I think maybe before we jump into each criteria, we can see who from the board might have what to share. But I did want to make mention, I guess, of two things. So after the last meeting, I think a few of us were a little bit unsure of, whether this was potentially an unintended consequence that storage got, slashed as part of the zoning bylaw. So I know I did take a look at, what was sent to us in our packets prior to that zoning bylaw committee, and usually we'll get a red line version of it and then just an article summary. So I took a look at that first, and essentially the language on it said that it was to clean up the 3A district, returning us to a time where there's just one commercial district and eliminating districts that have been little used or unused and thus serve no purpose. So, I guess the first thing I thought was, self-storage is not a use that serves no purpose. So maybe this was an unintended consequence. But I did today have an opportunity to take a look at the public forum from May 13th that Attorney Brodsky spoke of as well. And in that forum, Tom Callahan had noted that we've not typically enticed any LI or TB uses over the years. But he did go on to say that, interestingly enough, they had permitted or close to permitted a storage facility the evening before. But as he went on, he then said, interestingly enough, storage facilities will go away, but we will have 2 storage buildings as a legacy of the TB district. So I guess he was acknowledging that they consciously, that zoning board, when they made this modification, and again, I don't know that it's something that, I guess whether my opinion of it or somebody else's opinion of it matters. Maybe I think it's a good use, and I think, it's a good fit, but there seems to have been a lens that they looked at to say that they didn't want that use in this district anymore. But like I said, he did acknowledge that they had 2. Currently we only have 1. You would be the second. So I think, they had a kind of timing issue, but I think the only reason, or a couple of reasons I bring it up, is just to add some more context to what I found out from last time, but also, this board now has an updated bylaw in front of us, and a little bit more clarity that they did try to do away with this use, which, makes it a little bit tougher. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, I think, I say this sometimes with variances, because I don't want to discredit the amount of work that you've done to put into what you put together on the different criteria, and maybe we'll get to the point where we discuss each one of them, but you kind of put your best foot forward, and I'm sure there'll be opinions on it as to whether it's kind of quite enough, or whether it truly is a hardship. But that's just a little bit of feedback that I had, and we can go around and see if anyone has anything else, or if we would want to jump into any of the criteria and discuss those individually. Any board members have any?
I'm not sure I know what you're asking, Mike. You want to hold off on dealing with the criteria. So what do you want this phase of the discussion to deal with?
Well, I guess we could jump to the I mean, what we have before us is the variance, so I mean, we could jump to the criteria. I guess I was bringing up the other.
But Matt, it sounds as if you were saying that based on your research, at least Tom Callahan kind of assumed that the approval for this project, which was granted, was somehow grandfathered in, right? Isn't that what you? I mean, that's what I heard.
Yeah, I
Am
think
I
they thought when they were
misunderstanding?
approving. Yeah, I think they thought when they were approving it, it was the last one to be approved, you know, so they were going to do away with the use moving forward, but. You know, I guess his quote here was that, you know, we'll have 2 storage buildings as a legacy of the TB district, you know. You know, so obviously we know from the decision, they were for it.
Well, that's certainly, again, consistent with my recollection of my time on the committee in that to best of my recollection, it never came up that, you know, there was no discussion about, you know, there's this project that's already been approved, but when the change happens, it'll be, you know, somehow knocked out of the gate. It never came up. So Tom's statement kind of, you know, jibes with my recollection, which was that nobody felt that the change in the bylaw would knock this project out.
And Mr. Martin, that's what I was trying to express, if I didn't express that clearly. There's no question the bylaw change eliminates self-storage going forward in the 3A district. But the understanding, or at least was everyone thought that we had a validly permitted and viable project, which is why we're in front of you for the variance, and why I thought the Deckelbaum decision, when it talks about equities and the consideration of equities and hardship, is really on point. Again, the facts of Deckelbaum are different. And I wanted to make clear, I'm not suggesting anyone is a bad actor here. But this is I'm not sure there's a textbook case for a variance, but this is a compelling reason, and a compelling equitable reason, is that this was an unintended consequence of town meeting. And Mr. Callan's statement to town meeting is entirely consistent with what you read from the zoning bylaw committee. So.
Okay. So does the board think that we should proceed with some discussion of the criteria further? You know,
Yeah,
jump.
you know, I'm in complete agreement with Mr. Brodsky that the equities are very much in favor of the applicant, but our job is to apply the law. And I think the law on variances and the criteria for variances is set out fairly clearly, and we need to be deciding this on whether or not the application fits the prongs of a variance.
Yeah, I don't understand really the issue before us. I mean, even the applicant has accepted that a variance is needed, but once it becomes public, once the tolling starts in terms of a bylaw change, that freezes the bylaw. It isn't when the Attorney General or even when town meeting approves a bylaw change. It's when a bylaw change is proposed. And so I think we're not at odds in terms of saying that a variance is required here. But there was that bylaw was frozen when it was first put before public forums in the fall and in the winter of 2023, or fall of 23 and this winter of 24. So I don't know if we're really serving much purpose debating whether or not the planning board permitted this or not. They did not. They don't have the authority to permit a variance. So all they could permit was a site plan. That's fine, but that's not a variance. I don't understand.
So Mr. Chittick, this is Adam Brodsky. I think that the point is that the planning board, the building department, the other departments that we consulted, I did not appreciate the practical effect of the zoning change, which candidly was advertised as the consolidation of these districts for simplicity, without sort of public notice as to, well, that this may result in uses going away within the new 3A zoning district.
I disagree.
The relevance of well, I've looked at all of the notices, and I've provided you with some of those. I certainly can provide you with more. I know that town
Look
council
at what
has-
Article 17, I think, said back when this came before town meeting. The explanation was, and I'll paraphrase, 'cause I don't have it in front of me, basically that all the uses, or almost all the uses of the HB district would take precedent over any uses authorized in the TB or LI districts.
Yes, Chair.
It was,
I agree
quite
that
plain.
that's what it says. Again, there was no discussion in the public notice that that was going to result in the elimination of any uses, which is candidly why I don't think the planning board flagged this or any of the other
I
departments.
think it was absolutely plain that any difference between the HB authorized uses or allowed uses and not allowed uses and TI, the HB provisions would prevail. That's what it says. That was no mystery. That was not a secret. It was publicized. It was mailed to every house in this town, weeks, if not months, before town meeting. Everybody in town had an opportunity to read that warrant. So I don't think that's a mystery. I don't think it was slipped in or inadvertent.
Well, I,
That may be a moot point because a variance is what's before us.
right, I don't. I think that this bylaw changes were described pretty much as housekeeping and reorganization and cleaning up, etc. And I think that the history of this, that there was an elimination of a use, and at least some people, maybe everybody, didn't appreciate what the impact was going to be. Maybe a lot of people did appreciate it. I don't know. But the fact is the town meeting made a change and they eliminated a use. And because they eliminated the use and there was no permit in hand, variance is required. A variance has very specific requirements. And I think that if this application meets those requirements, there should be a variance. And if it doesn't, there shouldn't. So my preference would be to talk about what those elements of a variance are and whether or not this application meets it. And I'll tell you, one of the problems that I'm having, and it's a theoretical problem as much as anything, is kind of the last piece of the variance requirement, that it doesn't derogate from the bylaw of the town. And I'm having trouble squaring up a bylaw change that eliminates a use, a specific use, and granting a variance for that specific use, how that doesn't derogate from the purposes of the bylaw. But I remain able to be convinced, I think. But I'd like to consider what we need to consider to be able to make an actual decision on this.
So Dave, you're suggesting we deal with the criteria, the three
Yep.
criteria.
I
or-
am. I am.
We should take them in sequence, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, the first being soil shape and topography.
Right.
Yeah, and it would help me. I'm remote without papers. So it would help. Again, if I think if Mr. Brodsky could briefly give us his position on why that prong of a variance criteria is met, that would be helpful.
No, again, the unique site conditions, Chair McMorris, restrict the reasonable use of this property for other uses.
No, you're wrong, Adam. You're absolutely wrong. That's another test.
No, so
That
they're
could be a hardship test.
interrelated. The unique conditions have to give rise to the hardship. While they're separate prongs, they flow into one another.
Why don't you deal with the first prong and not try to confuse things by merging unlike criteria?
And again, I'm not trying to confuse things. This is how the courts analyze unique conditions. There has to be a causal connection to the hardship component. If it was simply unique conditions, we undisputedly have unique conditions not found in the zoning district. We described the zoning district in our last meeting, and we focused more acutely on the unique soil and groundwater conditions, which are not generally found in the zoning district. Again,
how do
it
we
has
know
to,
that? I mean, if you drive along that road, there's a lot of vacant land that slopes substantially, and I don't know what's under the ground and what the soil conditions are, but how do we know that this is unique compared to those other lots in the same district?
so I believe we provided you with an overlay plan that showed the zoning district generally, which is for the most part, except for public open spaces, developed. And we drew, and I don't know if Dan's got that handy.
You're saying that tests have been done on property in this district. Soil conditions, permeability conditions up and down the highway. Is that what you're saying? I wish you'd share
sir.
that with us.
No, sir. No, we don't have the ability to go on other people's property to do that. Those properties are previously developed.
How are you going to prove this is unique or unusual if you can't look at other properties?
Again, we did provide you with a visual to show you the properties that we identified within the zoning district.
I don't recall that. Maybe you could share that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, how does this relate to the uniqueness of this particular lot vis-a-vis all the other properties in this district?
And by the way, we don't have to compare ourselves to all of the other lots in the district. It's just generally within the zoning district.
Right.
Dan, can you explain what this depicts, please?
Sure. So this there's two sheets, but they depict the previous technology district, and the topography you can see is little tough to see, but the contours are shown from LiDAR information. So what it shows is the steep topography. These are 5-foot contours, so you're looking at 45 to 50 feet.
Why don't you deal with soil? Soil is only one of three of the elements that have to be dealt with. It could be a shape, it could be topography. I don't think you've got much uniqueness there. But if you're saying that your lot is topographically unique, that's different from soil conditions.
Yeah, I think, what we intended to convey with this is, that this lot has remained vacant, undeveloped, historically for quite a while. And, as we showed, we have very extensive soil information on this site. We don't have the ability to go perform test pits across other people's properties, but those properties are developed and have been able to be developed with suitable septic, primarily septic, but also stormwater systems.
The fact that it hasn't been developed is not that it can't be. It is simply, it had been developed and a use was abandoned.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you're talking about our site?
Yeah,
Yes, sir. Again, I don't think you could reestablish auto repair on this site, given the current conditions, the additional environmental regulations, the more stringent stormwater standards. Because I think the logical inference here is that if you could, it would have been done sometime after 2001.
there have been other uses of property along the highway business district that have been developed since 2001.
Yes, sir, and they're more intensive and as we've demonstrated, would likely not be feasible on this site.
Well, likely
that's
not,
what
as
demonstrates
opposed to
its
can't
unique.
be. You're speculating, and I don't think you're addressing the issue, frankly, of is this unique or unusual soil conditions for the district? That's what it says. Specifically finds that owing to circumstances relating to the soil conditions, shape or topography, blah, 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 and especially affecting such land or structures, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located. You've got to deal with the prevailing conditions in the zoning district and why this is unique or highly unusual, at least, to the zoning district.
And we've done that with respect to topography. You've asked us specifically about
All
soil
right.
conditions. Again, we don't have the ability to go onto private property and dig test pits. And so we're limited in the amount of information that we could generate. It is a reasonable inference, however, that if those properties have been developed and developed for more intensive uses, that those conditions would be different than found on our lot.
And specifically with, the jump in here, and I'll let Dan be more specific if necessary. We did quite a bit of exploration across this site. One of the reasons being is this is a site where, frankly, the soil conditions were not necessarily common throughout the site. As Dan outlined, there's really only a small area whereby we can use for a lot of the infrastructure necessary to place a commercial development. Obviously, the stormwater is incredibly limited, but even within the stormwater, to get down to the sand layer, where we'll need to, for the infiltration purposes, you'll know it's on the north end of that basin at the front of the site. We had originally wanted it to be on the south end of the site, but as we dug throughout the site, that was not feasible. We could not find the sand layer in a reasonable depth. And then furthermore, you're now limited on where we can find those infiltration points, followed by the septic system, especially, although it may look relatively small in the plan, that does take up quite a bit of area. And there really was only one spot on this site to place the septic system. So, we don't have the benefit of being able to do borings and test pits on other people's sites. It's something that typically would not be allowed and people would not permit us to do. But with what we've encountered here, it's certainly been unlike anything we've seen across any other projects we've done. And Dan and I spent quite a bit of effort and time to make this site fit and find those opportunities. And there are quite a bit of limitations he's had to deal with. So, there's certainly a lot, and it's a high hurdle we need to meet. But we believe we have quite a bit of data and information as it pertains to this specific site that it's quite uncommon, even within this site, how the soil is behaving and how we need to manage it.
How do we as a board know that the soil conditions here and whatever are essentially unique to this particular property as opposed to the properties that go up and down the highway across the street, the road, as well as the ones abutting those. That's the test we have to satisfy, not just that the soil conditions are differ on site.
Mhm. No, and we're certainly appreciative and considerate of that fact, and we can continue to talk about those different options. I think a good example may be the residential development behind us. They weren't able to fit a septic system, and they had to do something that was much more substantial from an infrastructure perspective. But it's a much different shaped lot. It's a different size. It has different levels of topography. On a 1.8 acre lot, we wouldn't be able to put in the infrastructure that they were able to put in.
Well, you wouldn't be able to
So
put in 250 dwelling units either.
that's
I mean,
that's
so
also true. That's also
that's
true.
an apples and orange
That's true.
analogy.
Oh, that's true, and I think on a per acre basis, our sewage capacity, as we've outlined in the application, is akin to a 3-bedroom home. 3 units on 1.8 acres is economically likely infeasible. So septic is one aspect of the constraint, certainly as it pertains to the topography, the soil. I certainly understand we need to isolate and deal with these individually, but they happen to all flow together and have been really difficult to engineer and develop around. As Dan pulls up the map of all the exploration we needed to do from a geotechnical perspective, that's the most I've ever needed to do on a site of this size, and it's because of the very unique nature of the property. So I understand certainly where y'all are coming from. I wish there was a better way we could show the effort and the difficulty. Unfortunately, it's Dan would have to get pretty detailed into the engineering, and there are quite a few concept plans that went back and forth, but we can continue to expand on all of it as you guys need, as you need.
We move on to hardship.
I know number 2 on the memo says literal enforcement of the provisions of the CZC would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise.
Again, Chair McMorris, do you just want me to hit the high points? I provided you with the case law that hardship is not being able to reasonably use the property for purposes of or in a manner allowed by zoning, and hardship can be found where due to unique circumstances it is not economically feasible or likely that the locus would be developed in the future for use permitted by zoning. I think this is a textbook case of that situation. We're simply trying to make a reasonable use of the property. It's given the unique site conditions as well as all the other factors. It's not economically feasible that the property would be developed in the future for use permitted by zoning. And that's literally evidenced by the fact that this site has been vacant since 2001, except for the cell tower.
Wouldn't hardship just exist from the fact that the applicants have gone through the permitting process and in fact obtained a building permit from the planning board and
It
then
didn't obtain a building permit, it obtained a site permit.
But I mean, they were playing by the rules and then the rules changed. That seems to me to be a hardship.
Yeah,
Again,
Mike, but the rules had changed a year before, more or less, than when they got their permit from the.
so
Mr. Chair,
so
you're
why
mistaken. You're
Well,
mistaken.
why would the planning board issue any kind of a permit if they couldn't do so, Woody? That's what I don't understand.
Mr.
Okay.
The fact that they might have made a mistake, an error of law.
No,
because
it
they
isn't,
don't have the
isn't a mistake.
jurisdiction.
Well, then, isn't a mistake by you know, municipal board a hardship?
No, I don't think
Really?
so.
I would see it as a hardship, Woody. I mean, you know, the town F's up and somehow that's the applicant's fault? I
the
don't get
applicant should
that.
have known about the bylaw change, in my estimation. It was not a secret 6 months, 8 months prior to. It's well known. Public forums, meetings with various town boards.
Well, we'll have to disagree on that one.
Yeah,
Woody.
I know. But I think generally speaking, though, the courts have decided that a hardship is not just optimizing or maximizing the value. It's being unable to optimize or use of the property for any of the permitted uses. And if you take a look at what's permitted in this district, the fact that you know, a hardship probably doesn't exist. I mean, you could put up here an a child care facility is allowed.
So, Mr.
With
Chittick, I
special
don't mean to,
permit.
I don't mean to interrupt. That's why when you're evaluating hardship, it has to be tied to the unique circumstances. We're not alleging that we're trying to maximize value here. You made that point clear, and I don't disagree with your position as a matter of law. That's not the test. I do believe that financial hardship is a consideration, but this board made clear when we last spoke about that you wouldn't consider financial hardship to be sufficient hardship. That's why I endeavored to find cases that talked about not being able to reasonably use the property for the purposes or in the manner allowed, or where due to those unique circumstances is not economically feasible or
Help me
likely.
again in the
likely-
citations you're referencing.
Yes, so I was citing to Creasa versus Milford Zoning Board of Appeals. I was
That I
citing
haven't seen. That wasn't
Stonebridge
in our
Marina
packet.
LLC, and and we're, I mean, to Mr. Dickey's point, we're not even alleging that there's municipal estoppel here, that somehow the town is a stop from do, but there is in the Deckelbaum case a discussion generally about this notion of estoppel, how you really should be able to take advantage of misfortune. But I didn't want to make that argument because I'm not suggesting that anyone did anything wrong here that would give rise to estoppel. But it's the unique soil conditions and the unique topography that give rise to the hardship, because that's what prevents the reasonable future use of this property. And I think that's the more appropriate and relevant test.
The Deckelbaum case hinged on a structural variance. It did not hinge on a use variance. The use was
Yes, sir. Yeah, that is correct. It's the same test for a use variance or for a dimensional variance. Intellectually, that doesn't make sense to me, but that is the standard under the statute and under your bylaw. I would tend to agree with you that uses should be viewed somewhat differently than dimensional variances.
It isn't just should be, they are in the law and in court cases.
They are not. They are not distinguished. It is the identical standard in 48 section 10, and it's applied by the courts, whether it's a use variance or a dimensional variance.
Well,
And that's what we're talking about here is that the hardship relates to the use, that we're not going to be able to make a reasonable use of this property because of those unique site constraints. That's the test of hardship.
I'm not convinced that the fact that nobody has done anything there for 25 years means that nothing could have been done there for 25 years. I mean, I'm looking through the permitted uses in that zone, and it would be helpful to me if you could um, elaborate on how the hardship piece of it works when there are permitted uses that perhaps may not have been considered for that lot, but is it a hardship if there are permitted uses that would work on that lot?
So I'm not sure how I can,
Terrible question.
how we can prove a negative. I mean, all I can tell you is that real estate in Cohasset, particularly on 3A, is valuable. This site has not been developed for more than 20 years. The reasonable inference is it hasn't been developed in that period of time because of these unique site constraints. Because all of the properties around it, except for the public
Well,
open space,
I know,
have been
but it could have
developed.
been it could have been tied up in an estate. It could have been somebody who just wanted to hang on to the land. It could have been, a number of things. But the question here on hardship is whether, well, I got it.
Sure. I mean, to your point, Dan can speak to sort of the other typical commercial uses that you see around us.
Well, I'm talking about permitted
Office.
uses. We have a lot of permitted uses in that zone.
Yes.
And it seems to me that hardship is because of those unique soil conditions, et cetera, that there's really no economically feasible permitted use that could be done on that piece of property. That's what I believe that the
Yes, sir.
financial hardship definition is for a variance.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're asking the right question.
I'm just asking it really badly.
Yes, no, I hear what you're trying to ask. For example, retail is allowed use, restaurant is allowed use. Why can't this site have those items or those type of uses on it? Is it due to the septic system, or is it due to the topography, or is it due to there? I think that's more the question you're asking of the applicant.
Right, like a business office or
If that helps.
craft shop.
There's a list that we already have established.
Right.
So if he could just maybe reference that list and explain why those uses can't be used, which makes it clearer that this is the only use available.
John,
If it's
excellent.
helpful.
Could I just jump in and suggest that in addition to what you've cited, let's deal with 3 or 4 others as well. A boatyard is allowed. What would prevent a boatyard from being put here? A pet daycare and or a pet boarding facility, a veterinary practice, a professional office. I mean, why would all these be prohibited? Or not prohibited? Why would they all be unfeasible on this particular piece of property?
Yeah, so from a technical standpoint, I think when you look at by and large the allowed commercial uses, they are going to be much more intense in their sewer generation. So even
A boatyard?
so that's an exception. I would say a boatyard probably extremely challenged on this site due to the topography. But I think that looking at something like a vet, a retail, a restaurant, an office, those are going to be much more higher sewer generation on a square foot basis. So even a significantly smaller building likely would not be feasible due to the amount of septic leaching field needed and the available space where that's feasible on the site. I won't say we've looked at every possible use and done concepts for every possible allowed use, but I think when you start to look at the amount of program that's feasible for those other uses, it becomes economically infeasible. In other words, you can't get the program needed based on what the site can accommodate from a septic capacity.
Yeah, I don't think you're required to, eliminate every possible use as an economic use, but I think you do have to address that issue. And we need to be able to decide one way or the other whether there is an actual economic hardship here because of the limitations and how they affect the landowner's ability to use it for any practical permitted use. And I think I said last time, I'm convincible, but I have to be convinced.
So, Chair McMorris, we did provide some of that analysis in our recent submittal. Are you looking for additional explanation on that?
Well, I didn't feel like it was that the potential permitted uses was really addressed directly. Is this the submittal that came in last week?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We talked about other commercial uses. We talked about office. We talked about these other uses, which would be, as Dan said, more intensive.
Is there some way to quantify that, I wonder? I mean, it feels like, yes, some of these permitted uses would be intensive, perhaps even more intensive, I'll grant you that. But there are others that are not as intensive. It feels to me like they're not as intensive. I don't know. I don't have any data.
There's so many uses, Mr. Chick. I mean, I'm not sure how to even
Well,
tackle them.
automobile repair, a boatyard, a veterinary facility, a retail store, clothing store.
I guess someone could say you could have a smaller retail space there and then the secondary use of the cell phone tower and kind of.
Yeah.
And then any retail is going to generate additional traffic, which is a major concern at this portion of 3A. If you want us to do, to try and quantify that for you, we're happy to do so.
But would that additional traffic create an impediment to the use? Would it prevent? How would it prevent use entirely?
Well, again, I'm sure we could come up with a 400 square foot retail facility that has 2 parking spaces. That's not economically feasible and support the level of investment it would take for this. So again, we're happy to provide additional information, but we need to have some reasonable parameters.
Yeah. And I think we certainly are doing our best to try to distill all of these down to single issues. But this also flows back to the topography aspect of the property. There is a sizable fixed cost to deliver access to any building that you could then place here, and you'd have to place it at a certain depth as you rise up the site to then make room for the stormwater as well as the septic. So we certainly understand it. There's variables there with size, but there's also significant variables there with, the fixed cost of even getting access into this site, which doesn't have, an access point today. That's something else that needs to be delivered here and permitted through DOT because it's currently done through a shared easement that isn't independent for the site.
And to that also, I mean, if you're envisioning a boatyard use, you'd have to level this site and pave it, generating additional impervious. I don't believe that we've got the soils that would facilitate the manage of that. A boatyard would typically have a marine repair operation associated with that. That's also going to require additional controls, which I don't think we can accommodate on the site. We can happy to provide, if you want to give us some examples of things you want us to evaluate to demonstrate to you, but it's a large, just there's so many potential uses in the district.
Adam, maybe you could take, for example, what the uses are across the street next door and at least provide the board with that information so that they have a reference as to what some type of data or comparison to that so that they can kind of have something to compare it to. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's what we're looking at. We're looking next door. We have office. Across the street, we've got retail. Those are the things that we're envisioning as possibilities for
Yeah,
the site.
and I think what they're asking for is perhaps a little more detail as to why does office not work, or the septic system requirements, or why does this restaurant not work because of X, Y, or Z, or why does the why and the additional data. I think
Sir,
if I don't mean to interrupt.
You know, why wouldn't the veterinary practice work? Why wouldn't the boatyard work? I kept my boat, a boat, for years at Steve Ward's, and it was simply packed earth. It was not paved.
I think we can certainly take a more detailed approach to some of the more likely uses for the site. Maybe not necessarily all, but certainly the ones that we would deem more likely, and hopefully that'd be substantive enough to the board to give them comfort on this point.
I think
yeah, and Mr. Chittick, with respect to boatyards, there are lots of past practices that are not currently allowed.
No doubt,
So
Adam. I
people
won't.
Wash their boats, resulting in metals in soils, and so you have to
Yeah.
have boat washing facilities. So I can appreciate what's happened in the past. It would not be permitted in the present.
No, I
and
won't argue the point.
I'm satisfied that we can comfortably eliminate any use that generates any kind of significant traffic. Because that trying to get in and out of anything along that stretch of road now is virtually impossible. So. And I acknowledge it leaves very few options, and many of those options might not be economically viable considering the extensive changes to the topography that you would have to make. So.
And you've
I
mentioned
think
this
if you are-
before, David. The
Pardon
fact that I said you've mentioned this point before, David, which is the fact that the lot has sat unused and undeveloped for such a long time kind of speaks for itself.
It's certainly a factor, and I agree. It's certainly a factor. I'm just mindful of the fact that we have objective criteria that we have to meet, and I want to have objective facts that fit those criteria.
Do we want to move the discussion on the third component, which would be related to the substantial detriment to the public good and without nullifying or substantially derogating from the intent or purpose of the zoning bylaw? I know David brought that up to begin.
Again, I repeat myself. One of the purposes of your bylaw is to conserve the value of land and prevent blight. I mean, I think that's an obvious point. With respect to the bylaw changing, and obviously since the bylaw changed, that's a derogation. I think that that Stonebridge case is helpful on that point, because in that case, again, there's an encouragement by the town to develop a piece of land, and at the time, a different set of bylaws changed. The landowner subsequently purchased the property, not knowing that the bylaw had changed. The zoning board granted the variance and was affirmed by the trial court because it determined that it would be a hardship to enforce the new bylaw, because that would eliminate the landowner's ability to reconstruct the house and prohibit him from making reasonable use of the property. So I think that's an example of a bylaw change where, in fact, the board and the trial court was able to determine that despite the change in the bylaw, the denial of the variance would prohibit the property owner from making reasonable use of the property. So I think it's a case right on point to that.
I did see that.
There's always going to be some derogation of the bylaw in the grant of any zoning relief, whether it's particularly, if it's a variance, it's a nature of the beast. We can't make that go away.
But I guess a couple things that Stonebridge case that you just referred to, I see is a 2023 trial court decision. Do you know if it was?
As I told you, trial court case with, has no legal precedent at the
Do you know,
appeals court.
was it appealed?
No, it was not. If it was, I would have given you the appeals court case.
Well, it could still be pending on appeal. So,
I jeopardized everything. I would have given you a citation. So,
excellent. All
Would
right.
it be possible for the rest of the board to
I'll
get
check.
these cases?
I'm sorry.
Would it be possible for the rest of the board to get these cases? I haven't seen that.
Sure, happy to provide cases. And I will double check whether there's any appeal, but my practice is to shepherdize my citations to make sure that I'm providing good law.
So how do I square away the not nullifying or derogating the bylaw for a specific use that was specifically eliminated a few months ago?
Because at the time it was permitted, it was entirely consistent with the bylaw, and that's what everyone assumed at the time, including, I'm going to suggest.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But the question I have is, we're dealing with the current bylaw.
Yes, sir.
Variance from the current bylaw. How do we square not nullifying or substantially derogating from the current bylaw if we grant a variance for a specific use that was specifically eliminated a few months ago? Because we can't assume the town meeting didn't know what they were doing. We have to assume that they did. And it was the intent to eliminate this use. So
I'm not going to speak to town meeting. Every grant of a variance is conceptually going to derogate from some aspect of the zoning bylaw. With that said, the grant of relief here is going to promote other purposes. Again, we've talked about preservation of land value and the avoidance of blight. It's going to improve the current non-compliant stormwater conditions that are out there. I shouldn't say non-compliant. If there's a development proposed, it would have to comply with the stormwater standards. But we have a condition where we don't have any stormwater controls on this, which again, perhaps not directly. Well, I don't know. I'll defer to the building commissioner as to whether the zoning bylaw addresses specifically compliance with stormwater controls. And all I can do is provide you with cases where obviously there's been a change in the bylaw, and yet the board and the courts have upheld the grant of a variance under those circumstances. So all I can say is is all I can say. Every grant of a variance is going to result in some derogation of some aspect of a zoning bylaw.
Okay.
The question is whether the good that results from the grant of this variance, it suggests, outweighs whatever that detriment is.
I don't think I have any further questions.
Any other board members have questions?
I would like to know, Matt, if there's anybody aside from the applicant who is speaking in support of this or opposed to it, and whether we've gotten any kind of communication from anybody either in support or opposed.
Yeah, if there is anyone in the audience that would like to raise their hand and provide a comment, please do so, or utilize the chat function.
Not seeing any incoming comments.
Yeah, I know there wasn't anything either way, that came through in the packets as of the last couple of days that we've seen, right, Julia? You haven't got anything new since.
No.
So Chair McMorris, we will request a continuance, but we would like a vote if possible on our request to withdraw the building height variance, if appropriate.
Sure. I'll move that we accept the withdrawal of the building height variance application.
Second it. Moved and seconded. All in favor, Woody Chick?
Aye.
Lee Darst?
Aye.
Michael Dickey?
I,
Charlie Higginson?
Aye.
Dave McMorris?
Aye.
Matt Watkins, aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then, nobody else had any comment? Or, do we? I guess, do you feel like you have enough as far as, knowledge on some of the additional deliverables?
Yeah, I'd like to, get a chance to read over those cases if Adam can send them across to us. But I don't feel like I need any more material or information.
And Chair, I don't know whether it's appropriate. I have made some notes prior to this, and I would modify some based on the discussion here, but I don't know whether it's appropriate to circulate a written point of view, nothing that we haven't discussed already, but just linked together or not. Not critical, but
You want to circulate it to the board members?
yeah, and to the applicant. Maybe articulating a little bit better perhaps than I might have off the cuff, but nevertheless.
Adam, maybe you can help speak to this. I think that might be an open meeting issue to communicate with the other members of the board outside of a meeting.
If it's determined to be a deliberation of some sort.
Would that be the case even if it went from, would it be the same logic if it went from Woody to Julia and Julia distributed to the parties?
Yeah, so previously we heard from town council that is a violation of open meeting law. So from my position, I would advise not to pursue that. Although town staff can provide like technical review points, but not personal opinion of the subject matter.
Okay. Yeah, I think, Woody, are there things that you had made notes of that you haven't spoken of tonight?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
I mean, I guess now would be the time to discuss them because we're.
No, there isn't. I know. I think it's all come out. Yeah, my issues on the three prongs, the three tests, and the lack of kind of analysis of neighboring properties in terms of, soil topography, et cetera, and the fact that it's been stated actually by the engineer that the VHB said that in one site, at one space, other allowed uses would potentially require additional mitigation measures at a cost to the project. Well, yeah, but that's, in my estimation, so be it. That doesn't that doesn't invalidate other allowed uses that might require additional mitigations. It's the real test is this property not usable and it's or not feasible economically for any of the allowed uses. Forget the not allowed uses. The real test is it infeasible, unfeasible for any reasonable allowed use. I don't mean something fanciful, but that's about the only point that might have been a little obscured in my comments, but I don't have to circulate anything. No, I mean, and if it's going to be treated as a deliberation as opposed to well, anyway, analysis, my analysis at least of the way the chapter section 10 reads, but no harm. Everybody knows where I'm coming out, I think.
All right, do any of the other board members have anything either that they want to request or follow-up questions? Okay, and the applicant, you're good on your end? Because we would make
We are.
we would
Oh, sorry.
make a motion to continue this until our next hearing, which is
March 4th.
4th. I'll make that motion.
Second.
Made and seconded. Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Lee Darst. Lee,
You muted.
There you are. Whoop,
Michael
okay.
Dickey,
Hunting for the mute button.
No, I thought if I hit the space bar, but it wasn't working.
Michael, you good?
I'm good.
Charlie,
Approve.
Aye.
and Matt Watkins, aye. Okay, thanks. So we'll see you in March at our next hearing.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Julia, are we gonna have a draft then?
Yes.
And I do think a variance requires a unanimous vote.
Sure. It's a 3-member board, a unanimous vote of the 3 members voting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Mhm.
Had a lot of paperwork during this public agenda back, and then we had a couple other items to just review. We had deliberation of any closed hearings, which we don't have. Meeting minutes from January 7th, which I think I saw, Julia, those haven't been drafted yet, right? We're gonna review those in March.
Yeah, if you could postpone those to March, that would be good. Last week was a little bit, I didn't get to it.
Yeah. No problem. I don't think we need to take a vote on that, right? We'll just review them when it comes in front of us.
Yes.
Do we have to do anything in terms of the dock in the Gulf?
Yeah, so
That's been drafted.
yeah, that's next year.
Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to jump ahead.
So review and vote on the memo to the Conservation Commission regarding concerns over ZBA approved dock at 94 Black Horse Lane. So just a little bit of background on that too. The Conservation Commission meets tomorrow night. So we did provide, they knew that we had some comments coming, so we provided some initial bullets, David and I, as far as what the concerns were that were expressed at our hearings, and explained our limited jurisdiction. And then that was put into a letter which was in our packets to just summarize some of the feedback that we heard at the meeting, and the fact that we had encouraged them to consider the community dock. And so we wanted to, hopefully had a chance to review the letter. We just wanted to we have to take a formal vote in order for that letter to be sent to the Conservation Commission. And I guess I will say too, I did catch up quick on the last meeting that they had, and they did have a number of the same folks that attended our meeting go to their meeting. So they were able to hear some of those concerns that we got firsthand. I think part of our thought initially too was if those folks didn't hang on and keep going to the next meeting, we didn't want them to not know about it. So any questions on the letter? If not, I can make a motion that we vote in favor of sending the letter to the Conservation Commission on behalf of the board.
Second.
All right, made and seconded. Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Lee Darst,
Hi.
Michael Dickey,
Aye.
Charlie Higginson,
Aye.
David McMorris,
Aye.
Matt Watkins, aye. All right, so Julia, you'll send that to Charlotte, the board.
Yes, I'll send that to them first thing in the morning tomorrow, so they have that for their meeting the next day.
I did see a note someplace that said they pretty much have the same problem we have, is they really don't have jurisdiction to force something like that. So it might be a planning board issue, or it might be a
It just, I did hear too that the applicant at that address did shorten the dock and put the dock to the side at a 90-degree angle instead of out front, but that was a proposed change. I'm not, I haven't seen it yet, but that was discussed with the conservation agent. So
Yes.
I think that was one change did come through since our last meeting.
good.
Okay. And we also had a bullet on here, correspondence to the ZBA follow-up. I think that's in regard to the sign on the corner of Sawyer Street and 3A. I did see that that's covered up now. So is that your item, John, as far as?
Yeah, that was, we asked them to cover it up, and that if they choose to use it, they were informed that they need to seek relief from the zoning board, from the sign bylaw. So I kind of left it at that. It's covered blank now. So the Stokes restaurant has is seeking no use of that signage area, and they covered it up.
So is it staying up in case the town wants to use it again for something?
You know what? It is the owner of the property's sign. So I just said that, you know, if you choose to put a sign there, when you apply for a sign permit, I will direct you to the zoning board for further relief. So I kind of left it straightforward. And that was that. And again, the restaurant people agreed fully and covered it up that afternoon. So they weren't, you know, disputing that fact. So.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah.
Matt, I did have one question for the board. Not that it matters. When they vote on the variance, will you guys be voting once on the whole variance or individually on point 1, point 2, and point 3? Just more of a curiosity question. Sometimes they address them individually in a vote, and sometimes they work as a whole. But just more of a question for you guys. Just
I think the last one we did was as a whole, right?
I think
Yeah, I think a negative vote on any one of those three prongs would doom the variance. We couldn't grant a variance without passing every test. So I think it's got to be by the whole.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I think you might have to vote on every test so that we know which one it passed or didn't pass.
Well, if it doesn't pass the test, they don't get a variance.
Correct.
yeah, I think that would be in the findings.
Yeah, so just so they know what the reason is.
Yeah,
or isn't.
yeah. I'm
Yeah.
not sure it's a
Yeah.
vote per se. It's, as Dave said, it's the vote on the variance up or down.
And then the explanation and the decision as to.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Tough one.
Yeah, that was.
That's more problematic if it's a negative vote overall. If it's a positive vote overall, I suppose you could have. Oh no, I'll rescind that. No, you'd have to vote affirmatively in all those. You'd have to agree in all those three tests.
Okay. Anything else anybody wanted to bring up? I just, the only other thing on here is our next meeting is Tuesday, March 4th. I don't know if anybody has any known conflicts or if we all plan to be here.
I will be remote on that one too. I don't get back, I think, till the 8th.
It's a long vacation, Dave, you're taking.
On a vacation, Woody. It's an escape. When it stops being cold, I'll come back.
Uh-oh, uh-oh.
We might not see him till June.
That's right, the way things are going.
And actually, I'm more concerned about when people stop being sick, I'll come back. It's not a good thing right now, is it?
A lot going on.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Julia, have you seen anything as far as our next meeting? I mean, we have this continuance, do you know, will we have a couple other?
Yeah, actually, a few new applications just came in. They came in last week, so I don't know if I didn't let you guys know in advance, but I had my wisdom teeth removed last Wednesday, so I was out for the second half of the week. But there were two applications that were submitted. So those are going to be on for. Actually, there were three. So one's for a dock. One is another variance and another is a special permit. So those will be on for March as well. So it should be a busy meeting. And then probably the two sets of minutes. So January, I'm sorry. Yes, January and February's minutes.
When is the cutoff date for filing? I mean, is it right like now?
So it's a 5-week cutoff and they submitted on the 30th and the 31st was the last day.
Okay,
For-
so we're
for the
not
March.
we're not going to get any new filings. You may get new material, but no new filings, right? For the
Wait.
March meeting.
Yes, so it's just those three new applications for the March meeting.
What's
They-
the variance?
It's for 350 Forest Ave. It's a dimensional variance.
Okay.
Hmm.
Oh. I know where that is.
Your neighborhood?
Yes. I walk my little dog down Forest every day.
Oh,
If you're driving between 7 and 8, everybody sees me and waves. So I'm in charge of making sure the whole neighborhood is in sync, and I look at all the building projects and houses for sale and whose dog. And random people tell me they see me walking, so no.
It's more than just the neighborhood zoning watch, huh?
I am, and actually, one of the special permit next month is my next door neighbors. So, anyway, so far, my other neighbors were 2 years ago, and now the direct abutters, and now my
you
other,
had two in your neighborhood already.
yes, one on either side, so.
Yeah. but then-
But the rest of my property borders the Froyos, and they've said they're not going to develop that. So the part that borders my house. So, but we'll see.
Could I just bring up a small point, and I don't know, Dave or Matt, if I look at section 10 of the enabling 40A, there is a phrase, I wonder if we could ask town council to clarify, unless I'm the only one that doesn't understand it, and it has to do with the conditions that a board must find, and what it says is, except where local ordinances or bylaws shall expressly permit variances for use, no variance may authorize a use or activity not otherwise permitted in the district. I don't know whether our bylaw is silent on that. I think it is.
I think we have a use variance.
Or does
in
it
the bylaw.
express, silence mean consent, or not? Dave, how might you interpret it?
I think there's a use variance reference in the bylaw.
Okay. I may be wrong. Okay, then. Variances,
I thought Dave might have quoted it either last meeting or the meeting before at some point. He did, I thought you did review it, Dave, and kind of come up with a quote that gave the zoning board the right to hear variances, use variances.
I'm sorry, you're right, John. It says including use regulations. Yeah, okay, so all right. I missed that. Yep, you're right. Okay, no, it's clear. So we are authorized to do this, so it's good.
All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have just one quick thing. Julia, are you drafting will you be drafting the decision? The King Street
Yes.
decision?
Yeah, I
Will
can
you be-
draft that.
Will you be drafting it one yes, one no?
I can do that, yes.
Because we do have to discuss the criteria very specifically and how we think they are met or how we think they are not met.
Right, so I guess that the findings would be left blank because it would be to the discussion of the
Yeah.
February, or the March meeting.
We'd have to fill them in with our deliberations, I think. All right, thanks.
Anything else? All right, make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Made and seconded. Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Lee Darst,
Aye.
Michael Dickey,
You bet.
Charlie Higginson,
Aye.
David McMorris,
Aye.
Matt Watkins, aye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for sharing, Matt.
All right, thanks.
Good night.
Thanks,
good
good
night.
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 Stay warm.